Technology is driving the business of the future, and we've already seen the impact of the internet on corporates and consumers. The Internet of Everything is bringing innovative concepts to cities around the world aimed at improving overall quality of life for all of its citizens. But this is only possible if you have the right connectivity infrastructure in place. Fibre optic-based networks provide high-speed connectivity to ensure that businesses are able to keep abreast of the changing landscape as well as to meet the demands of a modern operating environment. Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa special discussion, where today we'll be unpacking the business case for fibre to the business in South Africa. Joining me on the desk to share their insights, Reshaad Sha, Chief Strategy Officer, DFA, Puleng Kwele, Chief Executive Officer, Broadband Infraco, Nourse, the Chief Solutions Officer at Internet Solutions, Kanagaratnam Lambotharan, the Chief Enterprise Business Officer at MTN South Africa, otherwise known as Lambo. Thank you all for joining me. Reshaad, let's kick off with you. If you look at broadband connectivity, my question has to be, can you compete as a business if you do not have access to high-speed broadband?
Well, I don't think so, actually, because businesses have evolved over a number of years where they are highly reliant on connectivity of some kind. So broadband, of course, is the highest speed version of their general connectivity they would have had. But importantly, for them to operate as they would, to be able to service their customers, to be able to reach out to suppliers, to be able to really conduct their business, the internet has become a critical component of how they do business. And of course, high-speed internet connectivity enables them to do that at a faster pace or more productively, actually.
When we talk about high-speed internet connectivity, we're talking now about fibre, next generation. Is that where we're going?
That's definitely where we're going. I think it's all about the speeds that people need, but it's also about the benefits, productivity benefits to business, efficiencies, ease of sharing information when you have multiple offices, and we need that fibre to do that.
Sean, let's look at the status quo when it comes to connectivity, internet connectivity in South Africa specifically. How are we doing when it comes to international standards?
Well, according to the international standards, we are lagging, but we are making significant progress. We can see significant progress already made on the undersea cables. Those have all been lit up by fibre. We have some national long-distance plans that have come in and started emerging over the years. And now we're getting to the metropolitan and finally to the last mile circuits. So we are making progress. Unfortunately, it is behind the rest of the world, but it's important that as South Africans, we adapt to fibre, we adapt to broadband penetration and try and not just double the amount of capacity we get on our broadband networks, but we actually have to see the benefits of fibre. And what fibre gives us is multiples. It's not just double, but you can get up to 1,000 times more capacity and speeds off a fibre connection instead of a traditional copper line.
Lambo, how can we accelerate the process at this point and make sure that we start keeping abreast with the rest of the world when it comes to internet and connectivity?
Yeah, Sean just touched on it. I mean, there's been a lot done in terms of, let's call it the international connectivity, the national connectivity. I think really now it's the last mile that's, there needs to be a lot of focus on. I think there's a couple of things. One is there's a significant amount of investment. South Africa is a big country. If you look at density of population, it's a lot lower than the rest of the world, if you compare. So there's a lot of investment required. And I think secondly, we've got to work together, both public and private sector, and encourage a lot of investment without duplication, and also to share as much as possible in that investment.
Well, let's use that phrase, investment without duplication. Reshaad, I'm speaking to the converted when I put that phrase before you. Mm-hmm. It is about collaboration, public and private. Perhaps you can give us a little insight into where DFA plays in the infrastructure layer, because I believe you and Puleng are in the infrastructure layer, whereas we've divided the desk halfway into the services layer. So we've got the whole party at the table right here.
Yeah, so I think the infrastructure layer does require a significant amount of investment, and that investment needs to be made in a way where you are getting the best use of the capital that you're actually deploying into the ground. So whether it is the ducting or infrastructure or civil works that you're using or spending on, it needs to be firstly in the right place, and secondly it needs to be an efficient use of that spend. And what I mean by that is actually where you would have a partner or a company or a telco building a piece of network, that network must be built in a way that it could be shared across the vertically integrated value chain of the telecom sector. So if company A builds a network down a piece of road, it should be built in a way that others could use it without having to make the same level of investment. Their investment should rather be directed in an area where it has not been built already.
Puleng, I take it that this is not happening. At the moment, this rollout of fibre is potentially happening in an ad hoc manner where you've got duplication of investment and specifically no coordinated plan. Would that be a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment. I think as a country we do need a master plan from which everyone can work from, and I think we do have engineers in the country that can be able to do that. Because for us to build the national roads of broadband, regional and municipal roads of broadband, because if I may just explain it that way in terms of where we play, if you take your municipal road as your access points, we need to all be working from one plan, so we don't have the same companies trenching on one road on different sides of the road. That doesn't afford us diversity. It just, like you say, it's inefficient use of capital. So the country does need very coordinated manner leadership within the sector for the parties to all come together and ensure that we invest appropriately rather than just investing in the areas where we have an addressable market. Otherwise, we will continue to invest, but we will not bridge the digital divide.
Bridging the digital divide, it's something that we have to come together to do for the sake of a better, more competitive South Africa. Let's take the example of Old Mutual. We're in Johannesburg now, in Sandton, and Old Mutual is building an enormous head office just a couple of meters down the road. Let's look at that as potentially an example of a project that all of you would be involved in different layers of this project, especially when it comes to broadband penetration. So from the services layer, what would you like to see being deployed right now in the base levels of that construction site to make it possible to have that Old Mutual building connected within the metro immediately and with great access to high-speed internet?
So perfect. I'm pleased that you mentioned the word services, because the thing that we need to understand is fibre is the basic provider for services. As Internet Solutions is really want to compete on that services layer. And what becomes important that we can get fibre in there at the most economic price that's got the benefit to our clients. That we create an open access network whereby all service providers can compete first of all on price, but also on service levels. Uptime becomes important, redundancy becomes important. If a corporate client is looking at that piece of fibre in order to run their livelihoods, their business, their transactions, how they deal with their clients, how they deal with their suppliers, it becomes important that we get that and we differentiate on that services layer when it comes to fibre.
Reshaad?
Yeah, I think I just want to add to Sean's point there. And while the infrastructure layer should be taken care of, especially in a new building like the one you just mentioned, we want to see the competition take place at the services layer. So I want to build an infrastructure in a way that allows an MTN, an Internet Solutions, a CyberSmart, an XDSL, any service provider to come in and compete for that customer on an equal basis.
So you want to sit back in the boardroom and look at them while they fight it out and fight out on competition and price, from a pricing perspective.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about that, Lambo?
Well, we in the unique position where I think we're both infrastructure player and also service provider. So as MTN, we invest a huge amount in fibre and microwave. We've got to connect up all our base stations and also our corporate clients and so on. And we're moving now into the fibre to the home space as well. But I think the key thing is, as much as possible without duplicate investment, you can even swap infrastructure. So we build in one area and we swap with others, and we've done this with several of our projects in South Africa and other countries. And I think there's a lot of ways you can compete, coexist, and also what we call co-pete, so almost a combination of cooperation and competing. And what you'll find is that, at the services layer, there's so many different elements that are there. And I think the other key thing to bear in mind is that broadband allows you now to, besides productivity, but allows you to move things into the cloud where you can start sharing there as well, where you combine software and hardware and other assets that a company doesn't have to invest in on its own. So if you take any data center environment, you can actually share that investment across multiple clients, multiple companies. So I think it's enabling more than just the last mile, but actually across all your ICT needs, broadband gives you that ability.
And I think we've conducted a macroeconomic study where we've proven that within South Africa, for every R1 that you spend, you get R2.53 societal benefit. For every 1% percentage penetration, you get 4.8 billion rands onto your GDP. So the fiber is actually an enabler for us to be part of a modern economy. So whilst if we just remove the technology out of it and look at what the technology allows us to do, that you can be able to share the videos, the pictures, the information, that your systems run effectively, whether your office is in Johannesburg or Cape Town or any of that, and for the small businesses, access to markets. So it is what we can do with the broadband that is important. And the fiber then plays a role of ensuring that, at least right now, it is by far better than copper from a distances point of view, and the longer asset life of that becomes critical because you need to focus on just changing the transmission equipment at the end.
Reshaad, how are these public-private collaborations coming along? Are we seeing real progress being made?
Yeah, actually we are, as long as you don't call it that, because as soon as you put the label on it and you try and put it into some kind of a box with an MOU, etc., it doesn't really work. But in practice, Broadband Infraco and DFA work very well together. They've built this long-distance fiber network, we've built the metro, and we're able to pick up customers by collaborating jointly to deliver a service to the single customer. So their network will connect to our network to pick up the end customer and then carry that customer off to some other town in South Africa. So it works very well as long as you don't put the labels on them and try and do major press announcements around them.
Let's definitely stay away from the labels if we need advance.
Yeah, I think the one area that I definitely think there can be a lot of work done on is to ensure that we bridge the digital divide, and maybe there needs to be a stimulus outside the typical this is business and that's where you'll have the investment. If you look at what Australia have done with the National Broadband Network, is they made a conscious decision to connect the entire country, and it's actually a combined sort of project, but it's been run under government, and essentially it will benefit everyone, and everyone subscribes to that network. And I think there's flavors and models of that will allow us to get into every single home in South Africa. As I said, if you compare how much it will cost to connect every South African to maybe Japan and South Korea and some of the European countries, purely because of the population density and also what we call, the amount of people connected within a building. I think it's called teledensity. That is very low in South Africa. The amount of people within a building, compared to the rest of the world. So for both those reasons, it's very important to find a vehicle to connect let's call it the underdeveloped parts of South Africa.
And I think that we're going to explore in the second half of this discussion. We're taking a short break, but when we come back, we continue with our focus on the ins and outs of fibre to the business in South Africa and to the broader South African environment. Stay tuned to CNBC Africa. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa special discussion where we're unpacking the business case for fibre to the business in South Africa. Reshaad, let's come back to you and look at this open access network. What exactly is it and what are we hoping to achieve?
Open access networks, in essence, is basically a network that's built and made available on an equal basis to all the telecom providers that will want to use it. So telecom providers, internet service providers, however large or small they are, should be able to get access to this piece of network in a free and fair way, as in no specific kind of treatment of a specific service provider.
So no monopolies, in other words, Puleng?
Yes.
Definitely no monopolies, but it also has to be cost efficient for the people. I think various people are already sharing infrastructure as we speak. But there's always, legalities where people can say technically you can't necessarily connect with us because all the technology is taken up. So it does require, I think, at an infrastructure layer to be carrier neutral. so that those on the service layer can be able to participate within that network. But I think what's critical is that we as South African need our own definition of what open access is, because I think within the operators, everyone has got a different view of what open access networks are.
What should our definition be?
I think it's similar to what Reshaad has just said, to say that it must be accessible on an equal basis to everyone, not preference for one party or another. I mean, we have situations in the country where we can't access points of presence, we can't access buildings because, you know, people are just monopolizing those specific areas. So for us to reach out and ensure we don't duplicate, we need to open up those specific areas.
Sounds as though we need a regulator to come in and say this is one standard and this is how it's going to work.
Absolutely, you know, like regulations and governance becomes really, really important. You know, we need to say the adoption of open access infrastructure networks need to be that. They need to be open access, but they also need to be infrastructure. We should also govern what services they can actually add onto that open access infrastructure. You know, ideally is we'd want them to make their returns, make their money out of the infrastructure that they provide, and allow other companies like Internet Solutions, like MTN, to monetize the services layer, to make sure that there's equal competition on top of that open access so we can drive down prices and increase service levels.
And this talks to also reaching those underdeveloped territories that you were referring to before we went to the break. Mm-hmm. It was only with a single objective of public-private work together, although we won't call it that, we will achieve and reduce that digital divide.
Yeah, there's two key things. I mean, I think South Africa is a big country, low population density, and also few households per building, you know, on average. So I think you do need to find ways to subsidize or even to stimulate connectivity in the underserved areas. I think the other thing with the open access network that's important is that it allows you, for example, to make a decision. And a lot of companies go through this process where you decide whether you use someone else's network or you build your own. And in some cases, it's worthwhile building your own because it's a strategic asset that you want to own and you want to be able to control in terms of infrastructure. In other cases, you decide, look, you don't need to own the asset and you share it. I think the principles are very clear. We, for example, at MTN have a lot of our own infrastructure that we do open up to other people. Some of our competitors don't see it, you know, they don't really, they choose not to use your infrastructure because they see it as, in some cases, subsidizing your business case to invest and so on. So there's a lot of dynamics within the open access environment that one needs to consider. But I think principally everyone should seriously look at it because it makes a lot of financial sense.
Just tapping on to what Lamba is saying, that's why we need the regulator. Because if we are going to allow everyone to be just monetizing and ensure and not working towards ensuring that we actually break that digital divide. And by regulation, it's not only telecoms regulation, it's also your local bylaws in terms of us being able to trench is your environmental impact assessment. So you need alignment of various pieces of legislation for us to be able to deploy effectively. But left to the private sector, 20 years into democracy, there is a requirement for an intervention from a regulation point of view. And I don't think saying public-public or public-private should be taboo at all, because the broadband policy approved last year allows for that, because it does require for partnership between the public and the private sector, because the funding of this thing for the country is huge. You know, to Lambo's point, you need a lot of money. Private investors want their return in 5 years, which is why you've got to create the balance between how you're going to be able to fund all of this.
DFA's, sorry, Sean, yes, go ahead.
You know, I'd actually just like to pick up a point that Lamba made, you know, in terms of strategic infrastructure. And that's where we've got to be careful. You know, if we're going to go through open access, we're going to go through network expansion, is that the strategic locations of infrastructure that we put down should be for the open access providers.
Which means you need that collaboration before you put them down. Otherwise,
absolutely,
you've shot yourself in the foot before you lay the fibre. Perhaps you can weigh in with your experience from a DFA perspective in terms of putting down that fibre.
Yeah, so I think just picking up on Lambo's point as well, where he spoke of strategic investments that their company has made specifically in some parts of the network. I would disagree with classifying any piece of network as being a strategic asset. Even though, I mean, it's an important asset, it actually comes with a couple of other attributes when you classify something as a strategic asset, meaning that I need to exclusively access this piece because it happens to be down Santon Drive. And because I need to protect it, I'm classifying it as a strategic asset, and nobody else can get access to it.
So you're saying away with the protectionism?
I'm saying away with that. I'm also, my colleagues are talking about
your colleagues are shifting in their chair at this stage.
With true governance and true regulations.
Yeah, so again, I sort of disagree on the regulation side, because on the over-regulation, which is very, very possible to happen, when you try to regulate an environment that's fairly not so regulated right now, you are going to create lots of red tape for people to start doing stuff that they want to do. So for me to, build a new piece of infrastructure with sufficient amount of regulation, it means that it'll take me months before I can even get started on that piece of network that I want to build. Because the regulation may or may not say that, hold on, if you're going to build a piece of network, please make sure everybody else wants to be there before you go do it.
And is that I take your point, because regulation in South Africa right now, let's deregulate from a small business perspective. Aren't we going to be stalling the process? Is that what you're saying, Reshaad?
I'm saying we're going to impact the time of delivery.
I think there's a couple of things. So one, regulation where it accelerates the deployment of infrastructure is great. You can very easily get caught up in a negative cycle of over-regulation, and I think it's important. I think to my point around strategic investment, I think the key thing is when you're making a decision on investment, it can, we've, for example, built out national fiber shared by 3 parties. The point I was making, though, was you might not decide to go with a third party that sits outside, let's call it a group of common interest operators. You might actually, so the network, national network fiber that we've deployed across the country, about 1,500 kilometers, it was combined between us as MTN, Vodacom and Neotel. There was no involvement, for example, from Infraco or DFA, but that was a decision we made to share that investment. And it is an open access vehicle in the sense that we've taken that fiber and we've actually shared it with other parties, that are prevalent. The decision might be that you don't necessarily invest via open access vehicle. You might actually do it as a co-investment across multiple operators.
And I think you coexist.
Yeah, because you do want to own 100%.
Yes. But we are in a situation where pre-2005, no one could deploy. Telecom exchanges are classified as strategic assets. We then perpetually are then not ensuring that we drive infrastructure where we need it. As we sit right now, the operators are trenching on the same road. We need to get rid of that. And if we can't do it amongst ourselves, we need regulation to stop that. Not regulation to stifle infrastructure development, but regulation to ensure that the infrastructure even reaches, Kagiso on the West Rand, where I come from. I think that's critical.
Let me get Reshaad. Does this clarify the situation? Are you going to take this further?
No, it actually does to a large extent. And you are seeing cooperation amongst the operators, but in many cases, as Puleng just said, there are situations where operators do not collaborate. And you do need something more to make them collaborate, because maybe the capital savings that they get is not sufficient.
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
We sit with this challenge even when we deploy mobile base station infrastructure. A lot of what happens is the regulator or the municipality say, look, there's another Vodacom mast here, or there's a Cell C mast here, or there's a Telkom mast here. Why don't you use them? The fact is that that's the most efficient way of deploying infrastructure, and that's what all of us look to do first. If you deploy on an existing mast, telecoms mast, you save probably 60–70% of your upfront investment. The fact is that in a lot of cases, some of it's driven by the lack of regulation. I think some of it's driven by customer demand, because they want that infrastructure in tomorrow, and you've signed a contract with them that you can't necessarily walk away from. And in some cases, it's because it's difficult to work with a whole lot of different players and reach consensus.
I can't believe it. We have got 2 minutes left, and I need to get concluding comments. We could stay here and debate it all day, but I want to go back to our opening comments, and that was fibre to business, the unsung hero of enabling businesses. I'm going to ask you each to look at a concluding comment. Let's just say that we have a project, a collaborative project here. We're not going to say public-private. We'll just put that under the table. You are each in turn CEO of the way forward for fibre to the business. You've got 30 seconds to tell me what you would be doing right now as you leave the studio to make sure that we can create a fast, effective project and create a much more competitive South Africa, not only in the business space, but also in the underdeveloped environments. Reshaad.
We have over 700,000 businesses that are registered for VAT in this country, meaning that they potentially have some kind of a premise. We have only connected a fraction of that to fibre. The faster we move to connect more of those businesses using last mile builds that have to happen, the better it's going to be for those businesses and to our economy, as well as the impact that it will have on our GDP.
Puleng. Okay, as Broadband Infraco, we do provide backhaul infrastructure. We do not necessarily need the private sector to be investing in layers where we already exist. We need them to go out and invest on the service layer and ensure that South Africa is connected.
Sean.
At Internet Solutions, we're always looking to connect our clients. Connect our clients to their clients, to all their suppliers. And what becomes important is broadband penetration. We've got to look at ways that we can penetrate more areas and connect more businesses onto this fibre network so that we can stimulate this economy.
Lambo.
I think firstly we must find regulation that accelerates deployment of infrastructure, fibre infrastructure. I think the second thing is we've got to all focus on how we can invest in a very efficient way together. And I think thirdly, the opportunities for businesses are massive, and so we need to find a way to get also out to the underdeveloped areas, because the opportunity to connect schools and hospitals in those areas and the difference it can make is enormous.
Thank you all for sharing your expert opinions and for the robust debate. I definitely see a part 2, same desk rematch later in the year. On that point, we've come to the end of the CNBC Africa special studio discussion. Thank you to our panelists, Reshaad Sha, Chief Strategy Officer, DFA, Puleng Kwele, Chief Executive Officer, Broadband Infraco, Nourse, Chief Solutions Officer at Internet Solutions, and Kanagaratnam Lambotharan, the Chief Enterprise Business Officer at MTN South Africa. Until next time, it's goodbye, and thank you for joining us.